Hello, am I neurodivergent? Chapter 33 of 52, recapping my adult autism and ADHD discovery year. I'm strewn late diagnosed AuDHDer over the last couple of years, putting everything back together again after a double diagnosis and trying to make sense of it all. These last few videos that I've done, I've been doing a two stories, two narratives thing of my childhood, teens and 20s, the positive, external facing, everything's great narrative that masking puts out into the world, and the more honest, you know what, everything's actually been kind of rubbish and really difficult internal narrative, and then trying to reconcile those two stories, which are both differently right. For anyone that's not seen any of my earlier videos, I had a stress breakdown in late 2021, early 2022, basically what felt like out of nowhere, and subsequently got an ASD diagnosis, and then a few months after that an ADHD diagnosis. And having barely been aware of neurodivergence prior to that, kind of learned about and processed from scratch the fact that I'd been neurodivergent for 44 years, and how that had affected me and what it meant. So yeah, this is the final bit of my specific reprocessing me mini-series within this wider series, bringing my personal undiagnosed AuDHD story from the start of my 30s up to the point I kind of lost it a bit. Like I've said in these last few videos, I'd been speaking with a psychiatrist at this point in my journey, trying to kind of go through my life chronologically post-diagnosis and work out where the challenges had been through, and where the challenges had been and what it all meant for me, and how to put the pieces back together a bit and move forward. So I'm now doing it again, looking back with the two competing diagnoses. The first time I did this exercise was just through the autism prism, which made partial but not complete sense, on which, sidebar, we need to start doing holistic neurodivergence assessments, not just assessing its individual components and silos, because neurodivergent conditions co-occur more often than not and flip traditionally held presentations on their heads, but that's another rant for another time, and we're staying on track. And this is the positive spin, sort of Instagram external success story of my 30s and early 40s up to my breakdown to start with. Then I'll spin back in the second half of this video and look at the flip side of what was actually going on underneath all that. So right, my awesome 30s. So I started my 30s having somehow landed a job working in the Houses of Parliament as a researcher for an MP, who was, if people are familiar with British politics, an opposition MP and shadow minister at the time for both the Cabinet Office and what used to be the Department for Children, Schools and Families. I couldn't quite believe at the start of my 30s, after my random 20s, how I'd made a jump from working in a video shop, teaching archery and being a ghost tour guide, to finding myself standing in Parliament's central lobby waiting to hand briefing notes to an MP ahead of parliamentary debates. It was definitely a kind of pinch me moment, and I had some amazing experiences there for a year and a bit, just exploring Parliament, drinking on the terrace next to MPs and government ministers. Early on, the Cabinet Office Minister and future leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, met with the MP I worked for, and it took a weird spider diagram I'd drawn for myself on every random thing the Cabinet Office did, and he told her it was more useful for understanding his department than all the written briefings he'd had, so that was an ego boost. It became just normal to see the folk you saw in the news just sitting having coffee at the next table. Press lines that I wrote made it on the BBC. I got to meet the Dalai Lama, but it was ultimately clear there wasn't a lot of either job stability or certainty in the world of politics. And while my ADHD monster loved it, the constant not knowing of what each day would bring was pretty stressful for what I'd later know to be my autism. And my girlfriend suggested, for my own stress levels, that the civil service might be a good fit for me. Still in the political sphere, but a more calm, predictable environment. So I applied for an entry-level position at the Department for Education, kind of significantly below the level I'd been working in Parliament. Had an interview, got a job as basically a PA to two team leaders. Having spent the last year writing research briefs and policy papers and preparing parliamentary questions and debates and putting out press releases, I could do this PA job in my sleep, and I got poached to be what was called an assistant project lead, and got my first promotion within 6 months of being there. In my personal life, my girlfriend and I also spent my first 6 months in the civil service preparing to get married and planning our wedding, and much like when we first moved to Paris together in our early 20s that I talked about last time, this period was one that felt just really happy. We'd randomly decided to get married in Italy as a halfway point. Most of my family are from Scotland, most of hers are from Bulgaria. And we got venue, catering, and other arrangements all sorted remotely. I remember while we planned the wedding and honeymoon that spring and summer, there was this troop of baby foxes that used to play on an old mattress underneath our third floor window in shabby central London, while the trains from the underground station screeched past behind a wall, which we'd spend hours watching at night, having planned through the evenings. I remember these felt like pretty magical times with the kind of world in front of us, and I still think fondly of those times kind of now. So the wedding was amazing, the honeymoon was amazing, and then I was back to work in a new role at a higher grade and a higher salary. My new boss was this fantastically irreverent woman that I loved dearly. She gave me a huge amount of free rein and responsibility, partly because she said, with my kind of ASD pack of chronological project notes to keep track of every single detail of every project we worked on, that I was the most capable person she'd ever managed, but also partly, I suspect, because she wasn't that far away from retiring and saw that I was pedaling furiously to prove myself in this new environment, to basically act as a project lead, which was 2 grades above me, on a number of these school projects. I got to go and meet education leaders and local politicians and attend steering groups and prepare briefings for ministers. I got what are called box ones and performance bonuses my first 2 years in the civil service, and I was earmarked as this kind of future leader, shadowing the senior management team and being put forward for the in-service fast stream. In my spare time, I was volunteering for Animal Defenders International, a charity protecting animal rights and trying to outlaw circus animals and other cruelties. At work, I was promoted again to be a project lead and was asked to train other new project leads. The chronological desk instructions I'd written up to help me be a good project lead were integrated into my wider division's induction manual for new starters. Everything I was doing seemed to be clicking. When I was on a training visit to one of our northern offices, one of the staff there, who was really good but struggling to gain a foothold or get noticed, told me it's so easy for people like you, and it did seem to be. I seemed to be pretty good at communicating the quote-unquote right way to do things, at least the right way as I saw them. So I'd been promoted twice in my first 18 months, but I couldn't stop pedaling to prove myself. I applied to go to the Cabinet Office, the government department that kind of coordinates the other departments and picks up the bits that don't fall neatly elsewhere, to get what's known as bill experience, which is working on legislation, basically, and working more directly with Parliament. Bill experience is seen as an essential skill for further promotion to the more senior grades in the civil service. I got the job and went to Cabinet Office, working on 2 high-profile and quite politically contentious bills, the House of Lords Reform Bill and the Prisoner Voting Rights Bill. I got to draft and provide briefing to the Deputy Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Attorney General. I got to sit in the House of Commons doing box duty during a debate. The box is the bench next to the speaker where civil service officials sit just in case their minister needs urgent advice or answers during a debate. Neither bill ultimately became legislation, but the experience helped me get what's known as a grade 7 promotion, which was my third promotion in 3 years, which was gone faster than if I'd been on the fast stream, and I found myself back in the Department for Education again, this time as a team leader myself. Back, but not loving it, maybe, managing a team of 10 people with weekly ministerial meetings. It was a bit full on for what turned out to be an AuDHD kid. I was spending a lot of my free time when not going on awesome holidays with my now wife to cool places like Alaska and Australia and Nevis and St. Kitts and Japan. Basically trying to formulate an escape plan out of the civil service and develop this idea I had of what I called a world peace adventure, a kind of choose your own adventure style website and book, reteaching myself and anyone who wanted to use it about all the concepts and events that could and should, when slotted together correctly in the right order, lead to world peace. So like interconnected articles on religion, political ideologies, geopolitics, history, science, theoretical physics. Even as I was forging ahead in the civil service, I still had this ridiculous Messiah complex sense of purpose my granddad had instilled in me to leave the world a better place than I found it, which the civil service, as grand as it is, was not fulfilling. It had its moments. Like, I got really into PPM, which is project and program management during this period. It appealed to the autistic systems thinker in me. I got professional qualifications in it and ran my first program office. I jumped departments to the Department of Energy and Climate Change, where my manager encouraged me to go for the next grade up in promotion, but instead I left the civil service to set up my own PPM consultancy and A, have more control over my working patterns, and also B, reboot the World Peace Adventure project I was trying really hard to land. But before my consultancy, which I named Peace Jigsaw Limited, could get up and running properly, my partner landed a 2-year job in Ethiopia working as a legal advisor to the government there. So we moved to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. An absolutely incredible experience. Sourced our own apartment there, opposite the remnants of a shanty town, complete with, we had power cuts, water outages, and a political state of emergency, which severely restricted internal movement. We made a bunch of new friends from all over the world, explored other countries in Africa using ridiculously cheap Ethiopian Airlines flights like Zanzibar, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Egypt, Djibouti, Eritrea, Namibia. Generally loved the whole experience. Realizing I had no chance of getting consultancy clients in Ethiopia, and with limited internet access to continue researching and writing my World Peace Adventure project, I went back to what I knew for how to now fill my days over the next 2 years, which was the British Civil Service. It's like a bungee cord, it keeps pulling you back in. So I handed my CV into the British Embassy in Addis and ended up working there as local staff. First for DFID, the Department for International Development, and then the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, getting to head up and design a continental peace and security program. It was an absolute privilege doing that role and getting to represent the UK government in sessions and meetings at both the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and at the African Union itself. Re-inspired by my kind of teenage worship of the UN and global governance, that old Star Trek United Federation of Planets ideal kind of still loomed large somewhere in my subconscious. I also began to distance study for a master's degree in global diplomacy through SOAS University of London while we were out in Ethiopia, and started applying for jobs at various UN agencies. I was planning on taking my career international. We moved back to London after 3 years in Ethiopia in 2019. I got a distinction grade for my master's with a dissertation on state sovereignty and the future of nation states, and started my 40s pretty emboldened, feeling in a kind of flow state where everything was going the way it should for me. I took a full-time job back in the UK civil service again, right at the centre of the Cabinet Office. I was doing well, I was the king of the world, my career was back on track, and then bam, mental breakdown, major burnout, seeing a shrink. So what the actual F? So yeah, second version, that was a positive version. Same as I've been doing with my other decades these last few weeks, the quote-unquote bad or dissonant version of my 30s and early 40s, me in the upside down and what was actually going on with me rather than the external Instagram version. And this is probably going to be another bit of a rough ride for me, maybe, like my teens video was, so bear with me. So back to the start of my 30s for version 2, I basically drifted around like a little balloon in my 20s and was suddenly in grown-up land, working in the Houses of Parliament. I talked back in my teens video about feeling a certain comfort in being the underachieving smart kid, and it was right from the get-go of my 30s that I quickly realised, in the heart of UK politics, I was nowhere near as smart as I thought I was. Even undiagnosed, there can be a lot of advantages of being AuDHD when the conditions are in harmony. Like, you can do the big picture thinking and the detail, the socializing and the isolation, the spontaneity and the systems. But there are big effing challenges to be in both as well. Like, your ADHD attention hopping stops your autism focus going too deep into a range of subjects the way it wants to, but your autism also stops your ADHD from surveying the entire landscape like it wants to, because it gets overwhelmed with the enormity of everything everywhere all at once. Your brain's pulled in two contradictory directions constantly and just feels like it's on fire all the time, just trying to balance its two extreme aspects. So the super positive aspects of being just autistic or being just ADHD, when you have both, are often also lacking when found in combination, and just leave you feeling less than and like gifted in some ways, but just super average at absolutely everything in others. And this is not intended to be a woe is me in retrospect about my brain. It's just a kind of note, because having both, being AuDHD, that kind of horizon scanning, big picture, quick thinking, and the ability to go into super fine detail when needed is 100% a super strength, but it's by no means bulletproof. And you can feel pretty exposed when the air starts rushing in through some of those bullet holes. And there are some very smart, pretty brutal and ruthless people working in and around British politics, and it's really quite a small competitive world in a lot of ways. People who kind of delight in seeing vulnerabilities in others who might be competing with them and cutting them down to size by seeing weakness and telling you directly that you don't have what it takes, or just that people have ridiculously high standards and expect the best of themselves and others. Take your pick. So that year and a bit working in Parliament felt pretty brutal and confidence shredding at times. And after the idealism of my 20s that working in politics was for me, I quickly came to the conclusion that I was simply not bright enough or quick enough or able enough to thrive in this environment. I'd bullshitted my way in the door by convincing people I was smart, But the overwhelm escape strategy kicked in after about a year, feeling like I was a dumb kid stowaway drowning in a pool of very intelligent and pretty ruthless sharks who knew themselves and their own minds way better than I did. I also met some really cool and driven people during this time, but yeah, I needed to get out of there at that time. I felt unbelievably out of my depth and that I'd taken a hard wrong turn. This was total imposter syndrome, it turns out. Later people thought I was doing a good job in that environment, but who sees that when all you can really feel is that you're a bit worthless and know that you're ultimately faking it. Life in Parliament often goes at 100 miles an hour, and there was zero training on how to do the job. You were just in at the deep end. There was loads of pressure placed on you to provide briefings at short notice, answer questions, write lines for press releases. I just hated it, and I was miserable and knew I was wildly out of my depth. I realised I still had huge knowledge gaps in my general knowledge and just spent most of that year wanting to quit and run away, but forced myself to just about keep my head above water and not drown. There was a lot of displacement activity and panic in that job, working late hours and just paralysed with an inability to start tasks, and kept vowing that tomorrow would be the day I get on top of everything. But there was no structure in the job, and my MP gave very little away on what she wanted until just before she wanted it. I was feeling really close to what would have been a mega burnout, so looked for that overwhelm escape hatch and convinced myself and anyone who would listen that I just couldn't work for the Lib Dems anymore because the party was lurching to the right and away from the centre. Not because I felt completely overwhelmed in the job. We've got to control that narrative that we're in no way ever failing or drowning ourselves, right? I found the escape route that was going to work for me and got that entry-level job in the civil service at the Department for Education. Like I said, it was much lower level than the work I'd been doing in Parliament, but it felt like a really necessary reset for me, and in many ways the civil service suited me. There was loads of training. It was a less pressured environment at that grade. Work colleagues were really supportive. I was able to be really well organised, performed well, and quickly got a promotion up to the next grade. But then I kept doing well and kept getting promoted and quickly got back into situations where I felt out of my depth and was expected to think quickly and make decisions on the spot and have knowledge of all sorts of bits of government that I just didn't. It was this kind of period of my 30s where the autistic perfectionism really kicked in, and I started overworking really badly and trying to understand loads of different policy areas and be the expert in absolutely everything to stop me feeling so out of my depth all the time. But it also seemed to take me so long to understand policy areas that others seemed to grasp quickly, and I always seemed to need to rewrite everything in different orders that made sense to me before I could process that information properly and kind of own it and remember it. So I was routinely working really late into the evenings again, sometimes getting taxis home after midnight because I could only start concentrating once the noise of the day in the open plan office had quietened down. I was getting better at my job. I was becoming more of an expert. I was feeling less exposed, but I was absolutely exhausting myself being that person and just utterly miserable in this life and career I'd kind of fallen into. I mentioned that person who told me in a kind of envious way, it's so easy for people like you. And I was, I guess, presenting a pretty convincing front because people thought that I was really good at my job, but no one was seeing how hard I was having to work to feel like I was just good enough to even just show up at the office and not feel like a massive fraud just by existing. I developed really bad stomach and bowel pains during these years as well. Often just floored with pain in the mornings, and I ended up getting a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. At home, when I was there, I'd obsess over my hobbies and making and maintaining lists of like old chart music or Formula One drivers or wrestlers or tennis players. It didn't really matter. I'd justify it to my partner by saying it was all for a book on the history of whatever hobby I was obsessing over, so that I could publish it and develop an alternative income stream and quit work. It wasn't. It was just to somehow feel in control of something by being in my own little world, because everything else in my life felt so out of my own control and just getting dragged along behind events. But as out of control as I felt, I was well regarded at work, writing process checklists and desk instructions and shadowing the senior leadership team and presenting proposals to seniors and training new staff. But all of that was just because it's what I'd been told I should be doing. My partner always seemed frustrated with me for not being present mentally when I was at home or on holidays. I'd always be just scrolling through my phone or listening to music, never in the moment, never able to just be or feel happy or relaxed somehow. I talked in my 20s video about looking back and feeling the ADHD as being in the ascendancy for much of my 20s. In my 30s, the autism had firmly taken control and was just... it was just keeping all of us and our constituent parts in survival mode, just using whatever coping systems it had at its disposal to just get us through each day. So like my fun ADHD Tigger that enjoyed being spontaneous, the Tigger that greyhounded around America and wrote children's books in Paris about time-travelling cats, that Tigger was now a civil servant with IBD, like bound and gagged somewhere in the back of my AuDHD mind, just kind of slowly bleeding out. Yeah, around about this time I started casting around for sight of kind of anything more meaningful that I could spend the hours of my days on. After getting overcome with this kind of overwhelming sadness, which sounds ridiculous thinking back on it, at Monkey World, which was an ape rescue centre in Dorset, I set my mind on leaving the civil service to work on animal rights, but I just ended up exhausting myself volunteering for the Animal Defenders International charity, going through legislation once a week on top of my full-time job, and then had a meltdown and quit that because I thought they weren't appreciating me enough. And I started trying to develop this Wikipedia-me book of random information gathering with the highfalutin aim of setting out how the world should work from the ground up, which eventually morphed into my World Peace Adventure project I talked about, that Choose Your Own Adventure knowledge toolkit and PPM project templates, which again just never got off the ground. I was having frequent mini burnouts at work and taking sick days and just spending those sick days in bed, just kind of crushingly depressed. I even hid my sick days from my wife and left for work, travelled a few stops on the tube, then came home again and went back to bed because I just couldn't face work anymore. I had a really heavy workload, and I was a project lead at DFE by this point, routinely hitting all my monthly targets. I was often the only project lead in my team to routinely hit those targets, as I had my little project checklists to keep me on track, and just worried about everything more than others. More and more worried about being seen as less than and incapable, the more less than and incapable I felt. But I decided my escape route to feeling less crushed was to somehow ask for another promotion, because I felt ambitious to do more. Like, I didn't know how to say, I can't do this job anymore because I'm exhausted and close to burnout. So I pretended to be ambitious to give myself the opportunity for a fresh start. And because people kept telling me I had potential to advance, I listened to them and started working on this cross-cutting policy team, which I found even more difficult than the last job. And at one point I applied to the Foreign Office to work in Afghanistan just to try to feel something other than a weird simultaneous dread and boredom, like terror maybe, just anything to wake me back up and to get away from London, I think, and the same tube journey and same set of Whitehall offices every day. Like the ADHD side of me was really trying to find his way back out of the hole we'd all gotten ourselves into. So yeah, I just kept trying to move jobs to escape whatever situation I was in and get into a different team. At one point I applied to MI5, again just to try to feel something. To feel something that I was doing had worth, and to feel like I was living my life in some way rather than it was living me, and I was just a passive observer to the whole thing. I did succeed with these overwhelm escape plans multiple times. The civil service kind of enables those sideways horizontal moves, and I'd always tweak my flaky CV for each new job applied for as if there was some kind of clear narrative through line leading directly to this point, rather than just me being a kind of job tourist who came in, learned a role, made some good suggestions, then floated off again like this disinterested balloon incapable of committing to anything. But one time when escape options just weren't working and I felt increasingly trapped in a particular job, I basically exploded at one of my bosses and complained about them being a terrible manager, and then felt so embarrassed about having done that and letting my quote-unquote coping mask slip that I left DFE entirely and went to the Department for Energy and Climate Change. I felt completely out of my depth and judged badly there too, despite, again, feedback that I was actually doing the job really well, and applied to leave the civil service entirely under voluntary exit in what was pretty much certainly another major autism burnout in retrospect. Yeah, I remember at that point my partner was super worried, and reasonably so, that I was blowing up my career without a proper plan for the future. So I said I was going to set up my own project management consultancy, but I didn't really want to do this. It was just an acceptable, rationalised reason for quitting the civil service. Like, AuDHDers are really good at justifying and rationalising our coping reactions, by the way, and this was a complete rerun of dropping out of university to prepare for my imaginary film school application. But by then I'd committed myself to that and felt this kind of fake high achieving human performance anxiety to keep up a similar level of income that I was getting from the civil service, and did actually set up a consultancy and worked for a private sector client, getting paid a higher daily rate than I'd ever earned before. But I basically just didn't want to work anymore. I was exhausted and crushed and needed what felt like a complete reset. Luckily my partner then got a job in Ethiopia, and it kind of took the pressure off me to immediately do something different and rethink all of my life choices. In the few months before moving our entire lives to Africa, I had a bit of time to breathe a little bit for what felt like the first time in a long time, and started kind of going through old school books and diaries to try to piece my life together and work out why I am the way I am. I got into Myers-Briggs personality types, like asking, was I so unhappy and couldn't cope with life because I was an INTP, just an oversensitive introvert? I got into tracing my ancestry. Could I not cope with life because I might be a bit distantly Scandinavian? I tried to create this really detailed chronological history of me to try to find patterns of coping or work out where exactly I'd started to feel so unhappy, if there'd been some calamitous event in my childhood why I just felt so empty and unfulfilled and unable to find joy in anything. Like, there wasn't anything specific I could pinpoint. I think it had just been cumulative damage to myself, but still nothing was landing or falling into place. Like, why is diagnosis important if someone's coping? People ask. What else? I was picking my face hair really badly at this point and tried to see someone about it. I developed this horrible habit of scratching myself until I bled. Looking back, I think I started to realise at this short moment of pause and reflection that there was really something quite badly wrong with me from a mental health point of view. But again, life moved on, and those moments of quiet reflection and starting to kind of move towards something, some kind of aha moment, just vanished again before I could land on any kind of significant revelation or self-reflection. So yeah, like I said, out in Ethiopia, I got to work at the British Embassy almost immediately because of my prior Whitehall experience, and that was at first relatively low pressure as basically a private secretary to the head of the development office, then being asked to head up and design a pretty big joint peace and security program, which was really interesting, but definitely more pressure. So I was just right back into government work again, just in a different location. I tried to push myself in a new direction while doing all that, doing that distance learning master's degree in global diplomacy, which I really enjoyed, just learning for the sake of learning again, which I hadn't done for a long time, and was a genuine highlight of this time, until it came time to write my final dissertation, and then it all became about writing the perfect master's and having to write something seismic that solved world peace, because leave the world better than you found it was apparently a literal fucking instruction to me. And then all the autistic inertia and ADHD procrastination kicked back in all at once, and I was right back at uni the first time again as an inept 19-year-old, 41-year-old with his brain on fire. I went through a period of staying up all night, not making any progress, procrastinating, doing displacement activities, not feeling like I was smart enough to say anything new, just hating everything about myself and my time wasting and my lack of ability to just do the thing when I was the only person holding myself to account. I finally submitted it minutes before the final deadline, exhausted, worried sick I was going to get penalised for self-plagiarism, for repeating themes in my dissertation from previous essays I'd submitted, which is absolutely fine. And then, having finished that, I spent months trying to get a job in the UN system, first in Ethiopia and then internationally back out of London, failing time and time again, feeling worthless and pointless, and eventually just gave up and came back into the UK civil service with this kind of sense of dread that this life of tick box repetition was completely inescapable forever. Just bam, back in the same system that damn near broke me, but the only thing I seemed to actually be qualified to do. All the old stresses and anxieties came back multiplied, not feeling knowledgeable enough about my work, not feeling like I understood the overarching context of why political decisions were being made, not feeling like I was working fast enough to keep up with my colleagues. Cabinet Office is damn near as fast-paced as Parliament, probably the most fast-paced and reactive of all the government departments. My IBD and stomach cramps got really bad again. Coronavirus and all the various lockdowns hit, and all the anxieties that came with that. I felt absolutely trapped and like I was living someone else's life that I couldn't get out of. I really went through a period. You hear these cliches that don't make sense until you feel them yourself. Like the walls feel like they're literally closing in on you. And I wanted to quit my job. I felt like I was trapped in London forever and needed to see nature. I felt like I needed to leave my partner and my physical and mental health were just really not good at this point. I started seeing a life coach at my partner's suggestion to try and help me get my wheels pointing in the right direction again, but it was all just about how to be more productive. And then at this point, through clicking on a random link someone posted on social media, see chapter 1 of this video series, I realised out of nowhere that I scored highly for being on the autism spectrum. Read into it, realised with the sound of a kind of heavy ball crashing to earth from miles up that this had been me all along. And then the bottom pretty much fell out of my world, and I promptly had a stress breakdown, got signed off work for months on end, see chapter 5 video, and now here we were, 33 weeks after that, sat with a psychiatrist trying to put me back together again, and here I am a year or so after that, talking about it and still trying to put me back together again. And I'm getting there, but I'm not 100% there yet. And people ask why is getting a diagnosis, why is getting a label important? Finding out I'd been neurodivergent all along, first autism, then co-occurring ADHD, that there wasn't anything fundamentally wrong with me all these years, that I'd just been trying to live and succeed in systems completely unconducive to who I am. I really struggled, and have continued to struggle with the fact I've kind of sleepwalked through much of my life, ridiculously trying to be happy by trying to make the world happy with me, using entirely the wrong operating manual, and basically what felt like having got everything of significance backwards and in a monochrome negative. And it was a pretty devastating realization. I described it like that to someone recently, as kind of realizing you've been living your entire life in the reverse tonal value of your own specific reality, that negative exposure causing the darkest parts to brighten and tell you this is how you're supposed to do things, and causing the brightest parts that appealed specifically to you but were weird or not in sync with what everyone else said was right to fade back into shadow and think they were somehow wrong for you. And looking back on this reality where I'd pushed most of my craziest ideas to one side because they weren't financially viable, or people had told me were too naive, or that I had a sense of entitlement for not wanting to work a 9 to 5 like everyone else does. A reality where I'd become ridiculously stressed by cars driving too close behind me, or by people watching me, by feeling rushed, by having to speak to strangers or engage with new people, by timings changing at the last minute, by hating being late but always being late, by feeling stupid intellectually and incapable socially, by feeling always too busy to do what I want and robbed of the hours of my day but unable to initiate anything when I do have time, and by feeling judged and restricted and limited whenever any life choices mildly appear to deviate from what's expected of me, overwhelmed with just quiet background noise, overwhelmed when people just come and stand near me when I want to be on my own, by fretting about having missed something, fretting that everyone always seems to know more than me, know more links, have more contacts, overwhelmed with any kind of criticism, with being picked up on things I've not done right. Like, I spend so much time thinking about how to do something just right in advance that it kills me when it's even implied I've not done something perfectly. This reality where it's become ridiculously important for me to be seen to be being successful, to be getting things right, to be nailing work, to be nailing life, and crafting a narrative to reflect that. Working from home, pacing up and down my flat, talking to myself, berating myself, and what I actually want, 9 times out of 10, is just peace and quiet, to be left alone. But the constant being wrenched out of your bubble by the outside world over and over and over again, for allowing myself to become someone who both beats myself up for not being good enough and feels angry with other people for putting me in a no-win position where I don't feel good enough and just feel angry and desperate and failing at life all the time. Like having this sense of unfulfillable responsibility to yourself and others for those constant failures. Being in this near constant state of alert and trauma and anxiety because of the way your brain works, and placing yourself in the wrong environment for it over and over again. The innate difficulty of processing excess information and moving on from perceived threats that just aren't threats, and being incapable of initiating and moving between simple tasks because you had no idea there were even apps or websites telling you you're not a failure and here's some tips and workarounds for your brain because this is how your brain works and it's fine. You're just neurodivergent, and being neurodivergent is fantastic, but not if you don't know you are. It's not. To not even know that for so long, and to have hit burnout and exhaustion so many times you don't know if you can keep going. Why is diagnosis and a label important later in life when you've got by, people ask? You're just you at this point. You don't need to put yourself in a box. And what these people, well-meaning as they may be, fail to grasp is that suddenly having this self-knowledge about yourself and your brain, and more importantly this self-forgiveness about your brain, gives you permission to climb out of a box, not be stuck in one. To feel like two people all the time, the AuDHD blessing and curse, being an insanely creative dreamer bursting with ideas on how to put the world to rights, but being unable to put or even know where to start to put any of those ideas into practice, and an insanely competent, organized high achiever, furious with the flakiness of the other part of you to just get things done. When your autism hates chaos, but your ADHD hates routine. Where your autism hates noise, but your ADHD hates silence. Where your autism hates big picture, but your ADHD hates detail. Where your ADHD hyperfixations latch on an autistic special interest and you're gone for hours without coming up for air. And you drop any and all commitments or responsibilities and then you hate yourself for it. And to suddenly realize there's a reason you feel at war with yourself. You can't just go back through a door and be like, oh, okay, cool, back to this. Or at least I can't. Like, fuck, how do you fix this? What's that Buddhist quote? Holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing at someone. You're the only one who gets burned. Undiagnosed neurodivergence is having a hot coal strapped to your hand for however long you don't know, and no one to throw it at. You end up not only burned, you can end up fucking furious, like furious with the world and furious with yourself for keeping everything bottled in for so long, that this isn't something you're taught about when it's so many people whose brains are like this and made to feel shit about themselves. I'm still angry after a ton of therapy about this. There are days I want to go back and burn it all down and start again. And doing these last few videos has made me realize that I'm not some, I processed it all and now I'm great and you can be too. It doesn't work like that. It sucks. You missed your life and now it's half gone. But hey, righteous anger and upset can also be a motivator, right? As the therapist narrator shakes their head no. But I say hold on to the coal, because now you know it's burning you. There's maybe a bit of urgency, yeah? If you're not getting better, you're getting worse, because nothing ever lasts forever, even if your autistic brain wants it to, always. What's the other? The best time to plant a tree was maybe 30 years ago. The second best time's today. Anyway, that is enough of me for now. What a miserable little... I'm going to do a future video about refinding your value system if you've maybe lost it somewhere along the way, and refinding motivation and refinding yourself a little bit if you got way too far down a road that maybe wasn't the best road for you, and maybe work out what's next, because there's always time to change up lanes, even if that might feel kind of scary. So yeah, Thank you for sticking with me through this little public dance through my private journey. One of the things I'm trying to live by going forward is a complete lack of, just put yourself out there. 40 odd years I kept myself in here, so let's go the other way. Raw brain mess, meet world. World, do with it what you will. Next time, less me, more just normal videos again. Specifically, I'm going to do a few things on coming to terms with ADHD and getting that second diagnosis and processing how the two conditions affect each other. So my next few videos are going to have a specific ADHD focus, which I haven't really leaned into specifically so far. I'm just going to post as and when I do them though. I'm way out of sync with a every Sunday video at this point. I just want to get the content posted that I want to put out there on this channel at this point. So I'll be back when I'm back and post when I post. Cheers for watching. I'm going to try and make these a bit more upbeat and forward looking again, because yeah, today's better than yesterday and tomorrow's going to be better than both, so long as we start listening to ourselves. Cheers, live your lives. Everyone's good enough. Everyone's fantastic.